Sup you beautiful people. Hope you've had a fantastic day. Welcome back to another new episode of What If Deku joined the League of Villains. If you guys enjoyed this what if, comment down below and let me know. And go ahead and check out other what ifs in the channel after watching this video. Before we get into it though, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like, and also share this video with your friends. So let's start this video. Stain threw two knives at Nomu and jumped. Tenya and Crawler used their quirks to move to opposite sides to flank Nomu. Deku charged forward with great speed, and his grappling hook out at the same time. If this thing is after me then it's probably only gonna focus on me, he informed everyone. True to his word, the creature flew up avoiding his grounded opponents, and straight towards him, with both fists held out straight. Deku flipped sideways to avoid it. There was a loud impact that sent everyone but Stain flying. The hero killer came to the ground and attempted to slash Nomu, only for it to recover quickly and dodge. It then directed a kick at Stain, who moved gracefully to the side and directly next to Nomu. He then impaled the creature straight through the heart with his katana. Nomu wasn't even remotely phased as it punched Stain away and moved quickly to grab him, fly up and throw him to the ground where he created a small crater. Stain grunted in pain and tried to get up. Nomu launched itself down to try and finish off Stain, however, Crawler was faster as he managed to move Stain out of the way. It's strong. We should have about 9 minutes until the drug wears off, Deku thought. Nomu removed the sword from his stomach and threw it away. Deku watched in horror as the wound regenerated as it had never happened. Everyone be careful, this thing has multiple quirks. Regeneration and flight are two, but it may have others, he announced. Having spotted Deku, Nomu moved to attack him with his arm. Deku threw an ice grenade at the ground and moved to the side. Nomu tried to turn, but it tripped and skidded across the ice and crashed into a wall. Deku, let's aim for the head, Tenya called as he rushed forward using his quirk. Right, he agreed while running towards Nomu. The two boys jumped and spun in opposite directions. Deku put all his strength into his left leg. Tenya used his special move Recipro Burst to give him extra speed and power. The two kicks collided with Nomu's head simultaneously. The impact was so powerful it caused blood to burst from Nomu's head. For a minute it didn't move. Tenya and Deku thought it may have been unconscious. Wanting to be sure they hadn't killed it, Deku raised one of its arms and let it drop. There was no reaction. However, Nomu grabbed Deku and slammed him into Tenya, and sent them flying back. Nomu stood up. It began to regenerate its body again, but at a slower rate. If this thing has multiple quirks, then maybe it's possible that shock absorption is one of them, Crawler stated. When did you get so smart? Stain asked. Oh well, Crawler started. Hey. Deku wondered how they could bicker at a time like this. That wasn't what concerned him though. What concerned him was that Nomu was healing at a slower rate than before. Why? The drug couldn't have worn off yet, as there should be at least 5 minutes left. He examined Nomu further. The head part of it had a brain-like pattern and gas mask. Deku had not given it much thought before, but what if that brain pattern was its actual brain? Since it had been damaged, that was why it was taking so long to recover. Quirks were part of the body, and like every body part, they were controlled by the brain. This was no different. It was surprising that such weakness was made so obvious. Then again, it was also smart since no one would anticipate it. Everyone. The brain part of it is its actual brain, that's why the quirks are running slower, Deku announced. As everyone processed this information, Nomu fully recovered. Once it did, Stain threw two knives which struck its head perfectly. Rather than attacking Stain, it removed the knives first so it could heal. That proves your theory, Stain told Deku. We'd better finish this quickly then. Crawler, give me my sword or one of those knives. I want to try something. Crawler didn't question Stain. Dashing forward, he grabbed his katana. Stain then licked the blood off it. At this, Nomu froze completely. Stain grinned maliciously. It isn't immune to my quirk, he stated. Let's end this now. Stain and Crawler moved to attack while Izuku and Tenya recovered. Unfortunately, Nomu flew up to dodge them. Stain couldn't believe his eyes. His quirk had only lasted for 10 seconds. Regardless of blood type, it should have lasted much longer. Nomu attacked Stain again, but the latter dodged by jumping backward side to side against the walls. Crawler was not so lucky. Nomu managed to successfully smash into him and pinned him to the ground. Crawler coughed up blood. Nomu was about to finish the man off when Stain threw two daggers at it. Nomu blocked them with its arms and threw them on the ground next to Crawler. Its attention had changed to the larger threat. That regeneration must be shortening the time my quirk works for, Stain growled in anger. However, if given the right moment, it may be just what we need to win. Deku, get ready. You and I are going to do that move. Deku's eyes widened. He knew what move he was talking about. Stain only taught it to him recently, so he had practiced very little with it. Here we go, Stain yelled as he charged at Nomu. Not having much choice, Deku charged at the monster. The latter did the same. Deku took out a knife and his taser. This is a sort of fake-out move that can only work when you've got at least 2 weapons. Though there is rarely ever a time when it's used. It can be pretty effective if you want to blind an opponent and then take them down. It had taken a while for Deku to get the hang of it, but eventually, he managed. He first threw his knife at the monster's head. Nomu instinctively brought up left its arm to protect itself, temporarily blinding it. It was then Deku moved at max speed, so that he was directly in front of Nomu. Using his taser he jammed it straight in Nomu's face and electrocuted him. The shock absorption was the only thing stopping its head from exploding. Nomu staggered slightly and swung its arm. Deku however used his grappling hook to soar up. "How do you like it?" he shouted. Stain, who had gotten behind Nomu, sliced off its legs, causing to fall flat on its stomach. Before it could react, Crawler, who looked like he was about to collapse from pain, had two of Stain's daggers move toward it at incredible speed. Improvised special move. Slip slide slice, he shouted as he slid over Nomu and sliced off both its arms simultaneously. Nomu looked helpless. However, it still had its wings which it used to fly up. Unfortunately, Stain wasn't having it. Licking the blood off his sword, Nomu became paralyzed midair. As it started to fall, Deku released his grappling hook and dived straight toward it, while pulling his fist back to punch it. Tenya, who had recovered from using his special move, had a similar idea, and used his quirk to leap into the sky. "Recipro extend," he shouted as the engines in his calves accelerated even more. Deku put every last ounce of strength he had into his right fist as Tenya did with his right knee. Their blows collided with Nomu's head, causing even more blood to spill. The impact though broke Deku's hand, and he and Tenya fell to the ground along with Nomu. Crawler pulled Tenya out of the way, and Stain caught Deku. Once Nomu crashed to the ground, Stain wasted no time in cutting off his wings. Nomu lay motionless. It started to regenerate but stopped after a few seconds. The drug's after effects must have kicked in, Deku realized. When he realized this, he knew. It was over. They had won. "Eyes, we won," Deku announced. "Trust me. This thing is definitely down for the count." He left out the part of the drug as that was league business. He didn't even want to think about what would happen to him or his mother if he just casually told people about it. His past was fine as long as he didn't reveal too much. While the other two were convinced, Stain kept up his guard just in case. Deku couldn't blame him though. On a side note, they each had different injuries. Tenya's leg was sprained and out of commission from using his quirk. Crawler's body was sore all over. He could have sworn some of his ribs and internal organs had been damaged. Stain's body was hurt from being thrown down but nothing more. Deku's right arm had problems also. The impact from Tenya's special move had broken his hand and burst several blood vessels in his arm, causing him to feel immense pain. Fortunately, he still had some regeneration drug left over. The only reason they hadn't gotten smashed during the battle was because of the container they were kept in. Taking out the medicine, Deku injected himself first. He felt a sharp pain in his arm as it fully regenerated. After he was healed, he moved to do the same to the others. After a few minutes, they all appeared as though they hadn't been hurt in the first place. "Hey so what are we gonna do about that?" Crawler asked while pointing at Nomu. "We should leave for the law enforcers," Stain stated. "If not, I will finish it off." "I don't think that will be necessary," Tenya interjected, who had his phone out. "I can notify the heroes. It seems their battle is over now. Someone has been broadcasting it live, whether it's the news or some crazy fan I don't know. If that's the case, then the three of us should probably leave. We aren't heroes, and Stain is a notorious serial killer, so things might get worse if we stick around," Crawler informed. "By the way, Tenya, how are you going to explain your absence to your superiors? I mean, the fact that you're here all dressed must mean that you're on an internship with someone. There's no way your absence at UA would go unnoticed." Tenya said nothing. "Ida, what are you going to do?" Deku asked. "What are you going to tell them?" Tenya waited about a minute or so, speaking again. He decided to be honest with them. "I'm going to tell them the truth about what happened," he stated. "All of it." "Won't you get in trouble for that?" Deku asked. "Oh, I will, a lot actually," he sighed. "But there's something I need to say to Stain first." The hero killer shifted slightly in response. Tenya turned to face him. "You attacked my brother and I despise you for it. Regardless of what happened here, that hasn't changed. However, you were right about me. What I attempted was the furthest act from being a hero. Crawler and Deku, you both helped me realize that and I am grateful. However, it's because of those things that I need to tell the truth," Tenya explained. "That's why, until I become a true hero, one worthy of the name Ingenium, I will accept the consequences of my actions. This will be my first step." No one said anything. Crawler was looking proud of Tenya. Deku was grinning beneath his mask. He's learning. Willing to learn from his mistakes and try to become a true hero, Stain thought. Maybe there's hope for this full society after all. "I still intend to catch you one day," Tenya declared. "I look forward to it," Stain replied. "Stray from the path you are on, however, and I'll add you to my list." "Okay guys, we just survived death. Let's not ruin it by threatening each other," Crawler intervened. Tenya then turned to Deku. "Thanks especially for the advice you gave me. If it wasn't for that, I wouldn't have realized my flaws," he told him. "There's no need to thank me. Remember, I'm still a villain who attacked you and your classmates," Deku retorted. "Still though, thanks," Tenya said. "And it was just Bakugo, so don't worry about it. If anything, his defeat at your hands had some good impacts." Deku was surprised. He doesn't underestimate his opponents now, and he's willing to respect those who actually challenge him, even remembering their names, Tenya explained. He's still foul-mouthed and looks down on others, but he's improving. So basically, what you're saying is that he's slightly less of a dick than he was before, Deku translated. Tenya nodded. When he did, Deku couldn't help but laugh at how direct and honest he was about this. Tenya and Crawler joined in, but Stain remained silent. On top of a building, Tomoura was pissed as hell. Not only had the Nomus been defeated, but one had flown off left the scene. They completely ignored his orders and went off the moment he arrived. He heard sounds of impact a few streets away, but couldn't see who it was fighting. So, are you satisfied, Tomoura Shigaraki? Kurogiri asked. You'll know tomorrow when we see the news if we are on the front page, he stated furiously. What about that Nomu though? Don't you think its behavior was odd? Yes, actually. It looked as though it was searching for someone. Maybe there were a few flaws Viper didn't know about when it was conditioned, Kurogiri suggested as he opened up a warp to the hideout. Let's ask Sensei when we get back. Tomoura grunted in annoyance and followed him. He wasn't the only one pissed off about what had happened. At the exact same time, a bee that had been observing the fight returned to its host. A girl who was a student and part-time villain at the same time. Atrocity is gonna be pissed about this, she said. I didn't expect a student or that vigilante to be here. Seriously, first he stops the distribution of trigger, and now this, it's like he's stalking me. Well anyway, I'd better get back. May as well get this report over and done with. And with that, Ku and Hachisuka headed off. Back with the others, Tenya said goodbye to the three and headed to where Manuel was. Boy, was he going to get it still. If he wanted to be a hero, being honest was the first step. Crawler had said he'd be checking in on his brother, so he would see him soon. Stain and Deku left to continue their internship. Despite what he felt about Stain, he had to admit he liked Deku. If he wasn't a villain, there may have been a chance they could be friends. Tenya, where were you? Manuel shouted while running towards him. Do you have any idea how worried I was? Tenya bowed his head in shame. I'm sorry. I betrayed your trust, he said. Manuel was taken off guard by this, though this was also because of the way Endeavor had been fighting. He was angrier and more brutal than normal. Tenya, what did you do? He asked despite already knowing the answer. He knew it was why Tenya had become an intern at his agency. This what happened, he started while still bowing his head. The next day, the aftermath of the attack on Hosu had been rather quiet. The situation was different for each person though. Koichi had stayed the night with Izuku and Stain in an abandoned apartment block, which surprisingly wasn't all that bad. He was getting ready to leave, but still had something to do first. It was something he had to say with Deku. Hey Deku, I was just leaving, but I wanted to give you something, he said while holding out a card. It was his phone number and address. Deku took the card and stared at it. He then looked at Koichi. I know you're a villain right now, but if you ever want to stop and be a hero, well, a vigilante really, then why not join my team? It would be great to have you there. You'd be the youngest though, he said. He was surprised when he had seen the boy's face. He couldn't have been much older than 15. Additionally, he had seen what type of person Deku was. He wasn't a villain, he was good, and Koichi couldn't help but feel that he would be better off as a hero. Stain, who was eavesdropping on their conversation, had been having similar thoughts throughout the week. In his mind, Izuku seemed like someone who could be a true hero. However, at the same time, he knew that he had been hurt by society one too many times to want it now. That league, regardless of how pathetic it was, had saved him from the depths of despair. There was no going back for him. Thanks for the offer, but I'm happy where I am, he said while accepting the card. I'll let you know if I change my mind though. Koichi was somewhat saddened by this, but accepted his answer. He then said his goodbyes and left. He was going to have quite a story to tell his comrades when got back. Stain was still tired after last night's ordeal, and told Izuku that they would train later. He needed to talk with Razor about this. Fortunately, Izuku made no complaints and went back to sleep. Tenya was in the hospital for a check on his health. Last night after he told his story, Manuel harshly berated him for acting out of revenge. However, after that, he hugged him tightly and told him he was relieved he was not harmed. An hour later, Tenya was questioned by the police about Stain and those with him. He told them everything he knew about their quirks and their battle with Nomu. He felt like he was betraying them, but knew he had to tell the truth. Following this, the police let him go. They released the story out to the public but excluded Tenya. Due to his information, he had been pardoned, however, would still be punished by Yue, who had been informed about the incident. The story was bigger than the Nomu's the hero's fraud. Tenya was not looking forward to facing Aizawa, but knew he had to face the consequences of his actions. Manuel would be here shortly also to pick him up to go out on patrol. However, he made it clear that he would be keeping a closer watch on Tenya this time. However, the information he had provided did catch the interest of Naomasa. Knowing that All Might was interested in Deku, he decided to take it to him. He had something he needed to talk about with him anyway, along with the list of quirkless people he requested to see. On a side note, Naomasa was curious as to why Nomu was after Deku, according to Tenya. He was a member of the League, wasn't he? If so, why was he suddenly a target? Had he betrayed them? Those were questions he needed to find the answers to. The last 2 days of his internship with Stain had gone by quickly. They trained constantly but did so well hiding. The police knew Stain was in Hosu, so they were on high alert. Their battle with Nomu was all over the news, though Tenyu had been left out of it. Neither of them was mad at Tenyu though, since he was following through on his decision. The time had come for Izuku to finally return to the league. He and Stain arrived at the location where Kurogiri was supposed to pick him up in a few minutes. Before he did, Izuku and Stain had some things to say to each other. Facing Stain, Izuku bowed his head. "Thank you for everything. I learned a lot from you this past week, and for that, I am truly grateful." "It's no problem. I actually enjoyed training you," Stain admitted. "It was refreshing from my usual line of work." Izuku laughed. "Razor trained you well," Stain continued. "Languages, different fighting styles and pain endurance." While he was right, there were other things Razor had taught him. He did not want to discuss them. The two men said nothing for a moment. Awkward as they might have been at the start, they ended up enjoying their week together, brushed with death aside. Stain saw a lot of himself in the boy, and the latter felt the same. "If you don't mind me asking, what's your name, your real name that is?" Stain asked. "Izuku. Izuku Midoriya," the boy replied. "Mine's Shizumakaguro," Stain informed him. No one said anything, but at that moment the two men had established deep respect for each other. Before they could continue talking, however, a black mist appeared behind them, and Kurogiri emerged to greet them. With his arrival, Izuku and Shizum said their final goodbyes. "Farewell, Deku. I hope that the path you walk will give you the happiness you seek," Shizum said. "Goodbye, Stain. Thanks for everything and good luck with your crusade," Izuku replied as he disappeared into the mist. At the bar, Razor was away on another job for Sensei, but for once, Izuku did not care. Not when he had something more important to ask. "Shigaraki, Kurogiri, were either of you in Hosu a few days ago with a couple of Nomu?" he asked. "We were," Kurogiri confirmed. "I was going to use them to cause such destruction that everyone would forget about the hero killer. However, 2 of them were beaten and 1 flew off," Tomura raged. "And in the end, it wasn't the top story in the news. He was. Him, you and some vigilante defeating Nomu received full attention." Izuku was beginning to see that Tomura was a childish individual that was just desperate for attention. "Speaking of which, why did you fight against Nomu anyway?" Tomura asked while glaring at Izuku. "Aren't you supposed to be our side?" "Oh, I'm sorry. Next time one of them comes to kill me, I'll just let it so you can soak up all the attention," Izuku bitterly retorted. His response earned him shocked reactions from his co-workers. "What do you mean it was trying to kill you?" Kurogiri asked. "Even if it attacked you, how do you know you were its target?" "Well, it's like this," Izuku started. And so, he explained the entire event. How Nomu attacked him. How it rarely changed target unless threatened by another individual. Throughout the explanation, Kurogiri and Tomura remained silent, never interrupting once. They remembered how the Nomu just took off suddenly and started flying around like it was looking for something. Sensei had told them that Viper couldn't find the reason why it acted the way it did, since it had been functioning properly before. If it was trying to kill Izuku, then it must have been under orders from someone else. Fortunately, they didn't need to narrow down a list of suspects. There was someone in the league who hated the quirkless, and this would have been the perfect chance to get rid of him. How Atrocity had done this, well, that was something to take up with Sensei. "Izuku, you've had an eventful week. Why don't you rest for the day?" Kurogiri suggested. "I'll let Sensei know." Izuku was overwhelmed with relief. He was exhausted, both physically and mentally, so he left the bar to get some sleep. As soon as he was gone, Tomura and Kurogiri started talking again. "You think Atrocity did this?" Tomura offered. "Who else could have done this?" Kurogiri replied. "Whatever the case, I'm going to let Sensei know." Kurogiri left. Tomura shortly followed afterwards. If Atrocity had done this, then he was also the reason he hadn't gotten much attention. It really pissed him off. Later that day at the UA staff room, All Might and Amasa had just finished talking about the Nomu from the USJ incident. Well, the part about him having multiple quirks from at least 4 different people was surprising. Amasa also mentioned that there was some sort of lingering substance inside him that affected his body, though they still were not sure what it was. All Might was furious, however. The fact that Nomu had been given multiple quirks meant that this was the work of someone who could transfer quirks. "That man. He's back," he whispered furiously. All for One had returned. There was no other explanation. And he was leading the League of Villains. Sensing his friend's agitation, Amasa spoke up. "That Nomu aside, I have something else to tell you about," he said. "Did you hear about the attack on Hosu a few days ago?" "Briefly, I have been busy with work, so I haven't been watching the news much. From what I did hear, it involved several Nomu and the hero killer," All Might replied. "Why did something else happen there?" "It seems Deku was present also. He was fighting with the hero killer, a vigilante and a student here against one Nomu," Namasa explained. That definitely caught All Might's attention. He had been thinking a lot about how Deku and that boy may have been one and the same. But why was he fighting against Nomu? They were both members of the League, weren't they? According to the testimony we received, it seems as though Nomu was trying to kill Deku. As to why, I don't know. He could have betrayed them or someone within it could be out to kill him, Namasa explained, while All Might remained silent. On a side note, you wanted to see that list of quirkless people, well here it is. All Might took the list and quickly scanned through faces until he finally came across a familiar face. Izuku Midoriya, so that was his name. His eyes were as he remembered them, green, just like Deku's. His age also matched the way his voice sounded. This boy, he said. You think he's Deku, don't you? Namasa asked, causing All Might to look up at him in surprise. I'm a detective. When you requested to see this list after discussing the possibility that he may have been quirkless, it wasn't hard to figure out. All Might nodded. Namasa glanced at the picture and his eyes widened in recognition. Izuku Midoriya. I know him, there have been reports about him since he went missing last year, he explained. Missing? All Might repeated. What happened? It was about a year ago. According to his mother, he went out for a walk late at night and never came back, Namasa explained, while All Might listened intently. She didn't think much of it at first, but when she went to the school the next day to talk to the principal about her son, only to discover that he hadn't shown up. Later she called the police, and the search began. We questioned his classmates and teachers at the time, but no one had any information they could give us. Other than them, he had no known associates. Toshinori gulped. A year ago, that was about when he had encountered him. Hey this may sound strange to ask, but when exactly did he disappear? He asked nervously. Actually, it was the day of the sludge villain incident, Namasa replied. Toshinori's eyes widened in horror. If he disappeared on that day, then that means I did more than just destroy his dream, he thought, terrified. Why? Do you know something I don't? Namasa inquired, noticing his expression. Toshinori hesitated before answering. He hoped Namasa wouldn't react badly to what transpired between him and young Midoriya. The man was quirkless himself. I met him that day, All Might started. And I destroyed his dream of being a hero. Toshinori explained about his encounter with Izuku. He even recited their conversation as though it were happening again. Namasa said nothing. I'm not offended, Toshinori, he replied honestly. You were just speaking from personal experience. Also, you weren't wrong. Toshinori was relieved Namasa wasn't offended, but he still had something else to say. Originally, I believed that, he admitted. However, after a talk with Nezu, my views have somewhat changed. Somewhat, not completely. Toshinori was more open-minded to the idea, but at the same time, still held some doubts. Namasa stared at Toshinori for a moment before smiling. Thank you, Namasa replied. But that's not important right now. Finding out if that boy is Deku is. He then stood up and took out his phone to check something. Izuku's mother will be stopping by the police station in about an hour or so. She visits at least once a week to check in on our progress. If you want to know more about him, then I suggest you come with me. As Toshinori Yagi, he explained. Toshinori simply nodded and stood up. He texted Nezu to let him know he would be busy for the afternoon and would finish whatever work he had tomorrow. He could not afford to pass up this opportunity. He needed to be sure that Izuku was in fact Deku, and speaking with the boy's mother was the only way. At the police station, Inko was sitting in a room all by herself waiting. She was quite tired. Every day she went out looking for her son with no success. Whether he was in the city or the country, she didn't know. Whatever the case was, it seemed Izuku didn't want to be found. Since his disappearance, a lot had changed for her. Her routine, her social life, and her appearance. She had lost quite a bit of weight and looked exactly like she did 10 years ago. And here she was today for another report on the search for her son. While she was annoyed with the police, she understood that they did not have much evidence to go on. There were no witnesses, no sightings, no clues as to what he had done that night. There had been no sightings of him either. Their thoughts were interrupted by two men, a thin blonde man and a dark-haired man, who came in and greeted her. Then came the report where there were still no leads, much to her frustration. She was about to get up and leave when the blonde man started to speak. Mrs. Midoriya, if you don't mind me asking, Toshinori started. Could you maybe tell me why your son went missing? It's just that I'm new to this case. Inko eyed the man suspiciously. If he was new, shouldn't he have received a report about it? She had given a testimony after all. I don't know where this is coming from, but if he wants to know, I may as well tell him, Inko relented. If you really want to know, I'll have to start from his childhood, she stated. Toshinori nodded in understanding. As a child, Izuku was quite happy and got along with other kids. Like most children his age, he looked up to heroes. All Might being his favorite. He had action figures and posters of the man, Inko told him. He even watched that video of his debut a lot. I think that is what inspired him to become a hero. Toshinori tense. He suspected the boy had admired him when he encountered him, but he did not think it was to that level. The trouble started when he was outed as quirkless, Inko continued. The doctor told him he couldn't become a hero and to give up on it, which of course he didn't. Unfortunately, things only got worse from there on out. When word got out, his classmates started to bully him because of it. Katsuki Bakugo, you might know him from the sports festival, used to be Izuku's friend until he was established as quirkless. After that, he started to use his quirk to torment him. Toshinori froze at this statement. Bakugo and Midoriya knew each other. What is more, Bakugo bullied him. He could not believe it. Toshinori knew the boy could be aggressive, but he never thought he would bully another person. He reflected on the conversation Deku had with Kurogiri at the USJ. He had known exactly what Bakugo's quirk was. When the other students mentioned the villains didn't know what their quirks were. Does that mean he was there that day to get revenge on Bakugo? Toshinori wondered. If what Mrs. Midoriya says is true, then it does seem likely. Every day he would come home with new bruises or burns, Inko continued. However, he always made some silly excuse like he fell over. I didn't say anything because I knew it would upset him, and he denied. However, I should have done something sooner. He was in pain, and I did nothing. She was really getting emotional now. After much reflection, she realized she should have done something much sooner. It didn't matter how upset Izuku got because of her decision. Doing nothing was far worse. What about his father? Namasa interjected. I read that he no longer lives with you. Inko's face became even sadder at the mention of her husband. Hisashi moved off to some other country shortly after it was revealed that Izuku was quirkless, she informed them. Apparently, he had been suffering ridicule at work for his son's status, something which he and I endlessly argued about. He said he couldn't stand it anymore and said he was leaving. I know he doesn't hate Izuku, but I don't think he could stand the fact that his son was quirkless. He still sends money overseas to support us, but that's it. Other than that, we've had no contact with him. Since Hisashi left, he hadn't been involved in Izuku's life at all. It was the reason why they normally told people he left after Izuku was born to work in another country. It was better than the real reason though. Even now, she could visibly remember the day he left them. The two of them were having the worst in the history of their marriage. It escalated into full-on shouting which ended in him leaving. Toshinori was beyond shocked. He knew quirkless people were looked down on, but he never believed it was bad to the point where someone would abandon their own child. The prejudice had gotten much worse since his day. What about his high school years? He asked nervously, desperately. It couldn't get any worse, could it? Inko sighed. There were tears running down her face now. They were even worse. He had no friends because he was quirkless, and possibly due to Katsuki who was in the same class as him. He continued to bully him, and others joined in. They all made fun of him for wanting to be a hero, she told them. He was such a kind boy who wanted to become a hero so he could help others, and nothing anyone said or did could deter him. Toshinori didn't know how to respond. The description of Izuku's life he was receiving was horrific, to say the least. Yet at the same time, from the way Inko described him, he sounded much like Nanashimura, his predecessor. In essence, he was the sort of person he would have wanted as a successor. Mrs. Midoriya, this may seem strange to ask, but does the name Deku mean anything to you? He asked. Inko stared at him confused for a moment before suddenly remembering. Actually yes. It was a nickname Katsuki gave my son from the kanji of his name. It's supposed to mean worthless though, she told them. Toshinori's blood froze. In that moment, his worst fears about Deku were confirmed. There was no denying it now. He and that boy, Izuku Midoriya, were one and the same. Why does that matter though? Inko asked. Where did you even hear that name? That was a nickname he was given, it wasn't his real one. There was no real way the police could know it. It's something Namasa read from the interviews conducted with his school, Toshinori lied. I believe Bakugo was the one who said it. Namasa looked at him surprised. All Might took no notice of it though. He didn't know why, but in that instant, every fiber of his body told him to lie. Part of him just couldn't tell Mrs. Midoriya that her son might be a villain. Fortunately, Inko's suspicions were not aroused. To her that sounded like something Katsuki would say. The day he disappeared, she continued. I don't know what happened, but it was clear that he had reached his limit. He came home acting like nothing had happened, like everything was okay. Later at 10:30, he said he was going out for a walk, and that he would let himself back in. It was then that he hugged me and thanked me for everything. He told me he loved me for it and left. That was the last time I ever saw him. Tears were streaming down her face now. She had been holding this in for so long she couldn't take it anymore. Namasa handed her some tissues which she took. Toshinori was too shocked to speak. He didn't even know what to say at this point. All he could feel was a mixture of sadness, guilt, and shame. He was hanging off a cliff of hope, he thought. And I pushed him over the edge and into the abyss. He needed assurance, but I gave him despair. What kind of hero am I? Inko stood up ready to leave. She had wiped away her tears and stopped crying. She then bowed to the men in front of her. Thank you for listening, she told them. It's been a long time since I opened up to anyone about this. Thank you for telling us, Namasa replied. Please, Inko begged them. Find my son. Bring him back to me. Namasa nodded and said, we will, I promise. It was then that Inko left, and it was just the two men. Why did you lie to her? Namasa asked. If we ever do catch Deku, she'll find out then. I know, but until that happens, until this is resolved, this has to stay between us, Toshinori stated. I caused this, so I need to be the one to fix it. So please, for the time being, just keep quiet about this. Namasa looked at him in disbelief. He could tell Toshinori wanted to save this boy, but with the hole he had dug himself in, there may be no way to save him. The only things he had going for him were saving that student from being raped and stopping Nomu. However, he has still attacked Yue, worked with known criminals, and committed an act of vigilantism. Basically, he was still a villain. I will let you try, but don't expect things to go your way, Namasa told him. At the very least, inform Nezu. He can be trusted. Toshinori nodded. Regardless of what anyone said, he had caused this, so it was his duty to solve it. It wasn't just that he wanted to save Izuku, he needed to save him. Now more than ever. A week passed since the incident at Hosu, and the students of UA were settling back in while preparing for exams. However, things were not the same for 3 students. Ichako Araka. Ichako sighed as she walked along. The day had finished, and she was just about to go home, but first, she wanted to check in on Iida, who had been in detention since he returned. According to Mr. Aizawa, he had crossed a certain line during his internship, and was currently receiving punishment for it. The entire class found this incredibly strange because Iida was the type to follow all rules, not break them. The worst part of all, he wasn't even allowed to tell them what he did, much to their annoyance. Iida sighed. Something else had been on her mind. It was the villain who had saved her during the USJ incident, Deku. She had seen the news. He had been in Hosu fighting against the Nomu alongside the hero killer and some vigilante called the Holler. She had forgotten about him during the sports festival, but during her internship, he had slowly returned to her thoughts and distracted her. Their behavior did not go unnoticed. Gunhead, the hero she interned with, asked if she was worried about a friend of hers. She denied it, of course, but then he asked an even more awkward question. Is it a boy you like? Why did he have to go and ask something like that? She thought, frustrated. She denied it, of course. However, she only did so after a few seconds and rather frantically while blushing. She didn't like Deku, not that way. They only met once, for crying out loud. However, she couldn't stop thinking about him. Last night she actually dreamt about him. Her friends were gone. She was all alone, surrounded by villains who were going to kill her. She was terrified. One of the villains moved to kick her, and that's when he showed up. Deku entered by delivering a flying sidekick to his face. He then proceeded to beat up every other villain there until they were all down for the count. He then moved towards her and picked her up and started to carry her in a princess-like fashion. She didn't know how to respond. He looked at her and said, "Are you alright?" She blushed heavily and struggled to answer. That's when she woke up, still blushing. Do I like him? She wondered. Honestly, she didn't know how she felt about Deku, but she knew she didn't hate him. He was a villain, sure, but part of her could see good in him, or at least she wanted to. While walking, she suddenly remembered where she was going and snapped back to reality. Come on, focus, she told herself. You're here to check on your friend, Tenya Iida. Tenya was currently cleaning Power Loader's workshop, where a lot of the support cows, including that infuriating girl Mei Hatsume, built their inventions. The entire room was soundproof so students could build new things without disrupting anyone. Naturally, there were a lot of work tools lying around, so he had a lot of cleaning to do. Tenya didn't mind. After what he did during his internship, he deserved it. While the remainder of it had gone smoothly, his return to school the next day had not been pleasant. Nezu and Aizawa berated him for his foolish actions and sentenced him to cleaning duty as detention. Aizawa was furious with him and informed him that he would be doing this for a month, barring weekends, as he would need to catch up on homework and study, though Tenya considered this rather merciful, since he wasn't being expelled or suspended. And so here he was cleaning the workshop on his first evening. Afterwards, he was off to clean the toilets. I wonder what they're all doing right now, he thought. He was of course referring to Deku and Stain. Koichi Crawler, he knew, was back with his own team. They had met during a visit to his brother who was asleep at the time. Tenya figured out who he was but said nothing. While he was committed to being a better and more honest hero, he did not see the problem with certain people trying to help others, even if they were vigilantes. That was one thing he had learned during his encounter with them. And hey, who was he to judge? After the stunt he had pulled. Koichi aside, Tenya had often wondered about Stain and Deku, as there had been no news of them. Stain appeared to be laying low for the moment, as there had been no reports of hero deaths. Deku had also made no appearances recently, though he hadn't made many before. Despite his villain status, Tenya was hoping he wouldn't get caught. He had helped him get back on the right track to being a true hero after all. Hey Iida, just thought I'd check in and see how you're doing, Ichako said. Thanks, Uraka. Really, he replied. There's not much to see though. The brunette giggled. Aw, don't be like that. I was just concerned, Ichako said. Still though, I can't believe you have detention. Just what did you do during your internship? Tenya shot her a look. You know I'm forbidden from speaking about that, so please don't ask me, he told her. Besides, I'd rather not get into any more trouble. This caused Ichako to pout a bit. She should have known that Iida wouldn't just tell her. While she had come to check on him, she was also curious about something, and she wasn't about to give up now. Was it something to do with the hero killer? She asked. Tenya froze. It had been the most logical answer. She knew about his brother, she knew it had happened in Hosu, so she must have figured out why he interned there. Tenya mentally cursed himself. Don't say another word. No point digging yourself in further when you've already gotten in far enough, he ordered himself. Lucky Ida, I understand if you don't want to talk about it, but Ochako started. Could you at least tell me if you saw Deku? He's the villain who defeated Bakugo. Tenya gave no response, fearing that he would give away information. Still though, now he was curious. What did Uraraka want with Deku? If you wish to tell her, Mr. Ida, then by all means do, came a voice from behind them. The pair turned to see the principal standing behind them. Sir, what are you? Tenya started before Nezu interrupted him. I just happened to be walking by when I noticed the door was open, Nezu told them. I couldn't help but overhear Ms. Uraraka pry about your punishment. The latter started to fidget nervously. As to why I am letting you inform her, well, it's because you both share something in common, or rather someone, he continued. You both share an experience with that someone which you haven't shared with others. So just this once I will allow it. However, Uraraka, you must not tell others of Iida's ordeal. If you did, then he would be in trouble with the police. The brunette nodded. Nezu took that as his cue to leave and exited, unaware that Bakugo was hiding near the door listening in. So can you tell me what happened now? Ochako asked impatiently. Alright, Tenya replied. This is what happened when I was interning in Hosu. And so, he explained the entire ordeal to her. How he hunted Stain, how he nearly got killed, how Deku and Crawler helped him, how they fought against the Nomu, and what happened afterwards. Ochako never once interrupted him when he spoke. She did have mixed feelings about it though. She was glad Ida was safe, but at the same time furious at what he had done. When it came to Deku, it only made her more curious about him. She was convinced he was not a bad person, but was confused as to why he was a villain at all. Okay, now it's your turn. Why are you so hung up on Deku? Tenya asked her. He knew something must have happened between them if she was interested in him. Uraraka stared at the ground before speaking again. I met him during the USJ incident, she said. She explained everything from how she met Deku and how he saved her. Tenya was blown back by what he just learned. What happened to Uraraka aside, he was stunned at what Deku had done. Back when he first met him, he didn't think he was a bad person, but now he was certain. This doesn't make any sense, Tenya said. He isn't evil, but he's a villain. I know, right? Ochako piped up. All Might told me that villains vary in personality, but with him, what is it? Tenya asked curiously. Up until now I just thought villains were bad people who enjoyed hurting others and creating chaos. But now I'm starting to think that there's more to it than that. The same with heroes, she replied. Tenya didn't even know how to respond to that. He never really thought about it before. He had just accepted what he had been taught growing up. She has a point, he thought. Deku is a villain but wasn't evil. Koichi is a vigilante but goes around saving people. Stain is a cold-blooded murderer, yet he believes he is doing society a favor. Then there are heroes like Mount Lady and Captain Celebrity who only care about fame and wealth. Though there were also heroes like my brother and All Might who actually want to help people. It was all so confusing. What are heroes and villains anyway? Ochako asked. Honestly, I don't know. I thought I did, but now I'm not so sure, he replied. Katsuki Bakugo. Katsuki was walking along as fast as he could. There were a lot of things racing through his mind right now, which were brought up from the conversation he had just heard between Four Eyes and Round Face. What happened to them was surprising enough, not that he actually cared. What was causing him to act this way now was the name of the villain he'd fought. He hadn't heard it from the police, and he hadn't watched the news, so had not known. Deku, he thought furiously. That bastard I fought was fucking Deku. It isn't possible. He still couldn't believe it. He remembered that asshole had similar eyes, but he didn't think much of it then. Could they be the same? He wondered. He still found it impossible to believe. Deku was quirkless. Deku was weak and useless. Deku never fought back. Also, there was no way in hell he could ever beat him. But still, some of it made sense with him disappearing and having that name. What the fuck does he think he's doing? He snarled. That hero-loving nerd decided to become a villain. Does he even realize the state he's put Inko in? Despite his hatred toward the boy that didn't actually extend to his mother. On occasion, she had acted more like one to him than his own. If he has become a villain, if he was then the one who did that to me. Well, I'll have to remind that quirkless shit of his place, Katsuki growled. Thanks for listening. I do hope you enjoyed. If you want the next part of this video, like, subscribe and comment down below, and turn on the bell notification. And also check out other videos that I have created and enjoy. See you in the next video. Peace.